we knew it the whole way.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Taco Comfort Solutions.
We have a major controversy brewing in Rhode Island. Fleming Associates, the pollster that does all the work for WPRI and Roger Williams, needs to be fired. There's no doubt about that. Having Joe Trillo get as high as, was it 7% or 9%, was a complete overreach on his part. Clearly, he's in collusion with supermarket workers throughout Rhode Island. And that's how we begin the program this evening. Nice to have you aboard. Of course, we're going to talk election results with the same brainstorming that we did last week with Ted Nesi at WPRI.com, who also needs to see a shrink, who wrote last night in the wee hours of the evening. He can't wait for 2022. I happen to know his better half, and I'm going to be suggesting she come up with a hobby for him. Here's the headline for last night, and here's Eyewitness News' account of it all.
Let's keep going.
Governor Gina Raimondo celebrating after being re-elected Tuesday night. Looking forward to leading Rhode Island for another 4 years and pleased to have earned 53% of the total votes.
We were looking for validation from Rhode Islanders to this new approach, and they clearly said, keep doing what you're doing, Governor.
It gives her a good momentum going into her last 4 years as governor. People complained the first time she only was governor with 41%. This is the first Democrat who has 50% of the vote in a long, long time.
For Cranston Mayor Alan Fung, another disappointing night, finishing second to Raimondo just like he did 4 years ago.
Despite tonight's loss, it hurts. It hurts me, hurts my family, hurts all of you. We still have to work together, put our state on the right track.
Independent candidate Joe Trillo also disappointed, picking up just 4%, but Trillo says he has no regrets.
We ran an honest campaign. I love this state, and I wanted to offer the people an opportunity to have an alternative, and I think that's what the campaign represented.
Yeah, it was an alternative. That's a lot of dough.
Yeah. That's always striking to me.
It breaks my heart sometimes to see that people put, I don't care how affluent you are, to put your hard-earned money in almost exclusively and to come up with that kind of result.
He's not the only one, right? Patricia Morgan, I think, spent almost $100,000 of her own money on her primary race. Matt Brown, I want to say, spent over $100,000 of his own money. You know, and while, you know, yeah, it's you know, on the one hand, you sort of appreciate people putting their money where their mouth is when they run for it. On the other hand, boy, that's a lot of dough to put into something that ends this way.
But we shall not spend too much time on Joe. All due respect to him, it's interesting. We spent a lot of time on his independent role in this race throughout the race, only to have the number come out like that. Something happened. Something broke away from him at the end, and something broke for Gina Raimondo. Rather than me offering a postulate on that, what do you think, Joe?
Well, with Joe Trillo, obviously had so much negative in the last 4 or 5 weeks of the campaign on him. Our polling data for WPRI and Roger Williams showed he had a 53% unfavorable opinion of him. And when we asked the voters in our last poll, is there any chance you could change your mind on who you're supporting? Probably almost half of his voters said there's a good chance they could change their mind. And I think as it got closer and closer, minds were changed.
Minds were changed because of the way the campaign went, or there's just the calculus that people make, a combination of a high negative rating and also I think this is a waste because he's so reportedly deep third.
I think that's why it was, people were thinking that way. High negatives on him, and like, he has no chance, so let me go vote for somebody else.
But Ted, let's finally put something to bed here. Although the Fung-Trillo thing was prominent in this race, and I think cause and effect is apparent, Joe Trillo did not steal this election from Alan Fung.
No, I mean, you know, I know certainly Joe Trillo had an effect. I think his effect was bigger than the votes that he received because he did get a lot of attention. He was in the debates. Clearly the Fung campaign spent quite a bit of time thinking about how to handle the Joe Trillo issue, et cetera. But on the other hand, you know, Gina Raimondo won this election emphatically, and it looks to me like a big reason she won was because she had a surge of voters come out voting the Democratic ticket, and she and Sheldon Whitehouse were at the top of that ticket. we can argue, were they here for Gina Raimondo? Were they here to vote against Donald Trump? Was it a mix of both? But in the end, whatever it is, her get out vote operation and the political climate meant there were a lot more people voting in this year's election.
I think it is a mix of both.
I think it's a mix of both, but I give a lot of credit to Donald Trump. I really think when voters went in the voting booth yesterday, they saw a Republican, and that said to them, Donald Trump, and they just voted Democrat. We saw that all the way down the ticket. There was House races, Democrats won, that in normal years they probably wouldn't win. I think people were just voting Democrat because of Donald Trump in Rhode Island.
That is your ultimate diplomacy, Joe. I've never seen a guy so successful in the political world polling. People get upset at polling numbers, and nobody says a bad word about Joe. You know why? Because he just said he gave credit to Donald Trump. You mean blame?
Well,
blame?
Yeah, credit for the Democrats doing well is Donald Trump. There's no question.
Right.
Donald Trump is very much unliked in the state of Rhode Island. His numbers are very poor.
62% popular, unpopular rating.
And the Gina Raimondo campaign did an absolutely great job of tying Alan Fung to Donald Trump.
I think that, I mean, you know, I don't want to be superficial, but I have to say one of the biggest mistakes I've seen in my years covering around politics was Alan Fung wearing that Trump hat at the inauguration. And it might sound silly to people, and I know it's just a hat, but I also know after being in TV a number of years, the power of visuals. And if Gina Raimondo's campaign and the Democratic governors had been doing ads just saying Alan Fung likes Donald Trump, like, believe us, people would say, well, I don't know. Of course you say he likes Donald Trump, but he says he doesn't like Donald Trump. But they had a picture they could use over and over and over to say, he wore the guy's hat. Would you wear Donald Trump's hat? No, so why are you going to believe him?
Well, again, that's PAC money that came in to do that. And, yeah, I mean, listen, we could stay up all night. You obviously did. What is this 2022 thing there?
Well, we're going to talk about it.
We need to take a little break from this eventually. But I think this is a combination of things. You know, I have a very close family member who, before the vote yesterday, asked me, what do you think? I said, hey, listen, that's your vote. Okay, I don't know what I'm going to do. That person voted for Gina Raimondo. Don't like Trump.
Right.
Completely unmoved
right.
by Alan Fung, and kind of embarrassed over what Joe Trillo was doing. She said, that's it.
And I think a lot of people felt that way yesterday, Dan. I totally agree, because I spoke with other people who said the same thing. Alan Fung never motivated the voters of Rhode Island to come out and vote for him. He got 37% yesterday. 4 years ago, he got 36%. All our polling data between 34 and 37. He never moved in this campaign at all.
And listen, I feel bad in part with the hypercriticism of Alan Fung, but let's watch him last night acting like a 4-year-old after this whole thing.
I want all of you and all of Rhode Island to know, to rest assured, that I will continue to work my ass off every day for the residents of Cranston. And wherever I need to, in our state of Rhode Island, you're not going to shut me the hell up. Because I see all of you here, I see every one of you that privileged me with your vote. I'm not going to shut up. I will be here to fight for all of you and continue this mission to make our state a great damn state.
I don't know. Did someone tell him to shut up on the way to the stage? What do you make of that?
Well, I was struck watching because we took all the speeches live during our coverage on Channel 12 last night, and by, you know, Alan Fung's tone, I mean, even, you know, I don't think I've heard him use, you know, curse words, like low-grade curse words, but still.
Yeah, hey, listen, that's Dan York salty language.
Yeah, I'm not saying, I don't want to sound like, you know, I'm going to take my,
like, oh my God.
Exactly,
but
my
you know what,
spells.
there's certain places you may not want to do that. That might be one of them.
Well, or at least it's not something you hear frequently. And I was struck by, I feel like at the end of the campaign, there was a sudden shift in Alan Fung's tone. He was super aggressive in the final televised debate, and you heard a passion bordering on anger at times in his speech last night. Some of it perhaps the frustration of losing, which, you know, he's put a lot into this and the previous race. But also I couldn't help but think also maybe potentially trying to cast himself as more of a fighter as he looks ahead to 2022. And I know you think I'm crazy, but these politicians are always thinking about the next election, and there's not a deep Republican bench, and Alan Fung could have a shot.
There's really no Republican bench at this point. Alan Fung is the only big name left in the Republican Party in the state of Rhode Island. They lost the mayorship of Warwick. So, I mean, Alan Fung could be trying to position himself. Bruce Sullivan ran 3 times before he won as governor.
Yeah,
however, Bruce had
a
lot of and Bruce had a lot of his own money. Yeah. You know, can Alan Fung raise the money again? The Republicans pulled out on him this time. Will they be willing to try again in 2022? And There's a lot of Democrats waiting in the wing.
Come on, guys. I mean, listen, you might be correct about what he's thinking. What do you have, a learning disability here? Alan Fung can't move the needle.
Agree.
He's a B- player at best, acted like a D+ player there, has no vision. And I keep using the roller derby analogy on the radio. Remember the roller derby where the jammer went out? Gina Raimondo was the first jammer, and rather than chasing the jammer, he tried to prevent the other jammer, Trillo, from coming in. They got locked into a fight, and there was no race. She went around, did the jam, knocked the race off, and it was over. Did you ever see roller derby?
No, it's vivid, though.
You got to watch roller derby.
I got
the old archive. It was awesome. It's like, come on, man, stop enabling this guy.
I don't see Alan Fung running in 2022. However, I think he's keeping his options open in case something happens. That's all. He's going to be out of office in 2020, so it's going to be a whole 2 years he won't even be around.
All right, well, listen, we probably should talk more about the winning candidate. We will, and the Speaker of the House, who also was angry in victory last night. Stay with us.
I'm not going to comment about that. I mean, you know, I've always respected everyone's wish with that. You folks just don't know the facts. You know, quite frankly, you're airing stories that you don't know the facts to. So I will address those issues like we address everything, fully vetting them when people want to come out with the facts and vet them. And until then, it's, I think, inappropriate to talk about things where nobody knows the facts, including myself, by the way.
Okay. Everyone has the right to have a little disorientation after an election victory, and congratulations to the Speaker. That was not easy, what he did last night.
Not at all.
This Cale Keeble thing, that's the Burrillville rep who got jammed up in an alleged sexual harassment situation. Ted Nesi's story. Go to WPR.com and read all about it. We'll get back to Gina in a second, but since we started with that, Speaker fended off Steve Frias down to the wire again. This time, I think some of that Democratic Rhode Island blue wave helped him. Yes? No?
I agree.
I agree with you.
Different conditions.
Yes. Yeah, normally that district would vote more Republican in an off year, but this time I think because of Donald Trump, they voted more Democratic. And again, the Speaker had a big organization, had a big get-out-the-vote operation over in that area. They had thousands of voters identified. They knew who their vote was, and they obviously pushed him out.
And I think, you know, it was interesting to me when we did our debate with the Speaker and Steve, which was about 2 or 3 weeks ago now. You know, historically, it had been clear to me from the Speaker's office they felt Governor Raimondo was a problem for him, that she was unpopular in his district and a real issue, you know, holding him back. But when we asked, you know, who are you voting for governor, he didn't just say Gina Raimondo, like, sadly or something. He said, Gina Raimondo, you know, I think she's doing a good job, and, you know, like, went out of his way to say a couple nice things about her. And it was clear to me from that and other comments I heard him make that the governor's political standing had improved enough. I'm not saying she's, you know, Ms. Popularity in his district, but enough that he felt like, okay, it's okay to be somewhat aligned with her, and I'm not going to run away from that as the two Democrats on the ticket. And I think you might have seen yesterday that he actually got some help from the overall Democratic lift.
I think the big thing to look at is take the whole city of Cranston. 4 years ago, Alan Fung won Cranston by 8,500 votes. Yesterday, he won it by 4,000 votes.
Yes.
There's a big difference right there. That's the blue wave, I believe.
Small. And his robocall didn't help Steve Frias over the line.
No.
The Speaker is going to have an interesting play now. My guess is that he will retain the speakership.
Mine as well.
Although it will be a turbulent time. I know that Labor has their own particular game plan that they're going to try to engage in this early part of the session, where they're going to try to hold him accountable for a lot of things and still blame him on things. You know, the Paul Sox story didn't resonate in this election. And some people think it's because it was unimportant to people. I don't think it's unimportant to people. Nobody took the other side in this general election race. Alan Fung didn't, other than saying she screwed it up, he didn't have a point of view on that. Trillo didn't have a point of view on that. Mattiello was trying to fool everybody into thinking he had managed it well. But Labor's upset with him on this and other projects. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays. What's the progressive movement's role now in the General Assembly?
Well, you know, on the one hand, you know, they did strengthen their numbers in some spots. There's a number of progressive candidates who won last night. On the other hand, I think they put out a news release earlier in the week saying there were 18 reps, Democratic reps, who wouldn't vote for Mattiello for Speaker. Well, it takes 38 to elect a Speaker, so they're still 20 away, and they were publicly acknowledging that. I have to think the Speaker should not have problem keeping his caucus together and keeping the votes unless there's more developments that harm his political position in the coming 2 months before the actual vote in January.
But they're caucusing tomorrow night, and he doesn't call a caucus unless he knows he has the votes and has them solid. So obviously he feels very comfortable tomorrow night getting the votes. And as Ted said, unless something breaks between now and January, he'll be Speaker again.
Let's talk about the governor and moving forward. It's funny, Mark Patinkin put something in his column this morning, kind of like a loving essay. And I love Mark, but on the governor, where he actually attributed her to say that she had no interest in Washington.
She said that, I will say, she said that before. On the other hand, well, I could see where, I would believe it's more fun to be a governor than a senator. I'll say that. A governor can actually do things. A senator has to talk a lot and vote and whatever and fly back and forth. That said, the governor is young. She just showed she has political skills beyond maybe what people thought a few months ago. She has a national fundraising network. There's nothing else to run for at the state level. She's term limited as governor. So unless she runs someday for something like the United States Senate, or seeks to be on a national ticket, that would mean she would be done with politics.
Well, I think there's room for cabinet positions. I think there's all sorts of. Washington doesn't just mean the 3 or 4 places where you can get elected.
I think appointments would be the way the governor will look at it. I do not see her running for the U.S. Senate. Jack Reed's up 2 years for now. I see Jack Reed running again. Sheldon Whitehouse was just reelected. There's no spot for her. She's not going to run against
lose a U.S. House seat in the next couple of years, so there'll be even fewer Washington jobs.
So it would be basically looking for a cabinet position or something in Washington as a job.
So speaking of Congress, both Congressman Cicilline and Langevin won by the same kind of margins. And by the way, I hate to stick it to Alan Fung, but God, you ran a race for governor. You got 37%. It's only 3 or 4% more than the other guys who had no money, and I couldn't even remember their names.
Yeah,
there's a built-in default position. Right. So maybe that's why he's angry.
Could be.
But Cicilline and Langevin now on a collision course, it looks like, perhaps.
Yeah, it's interesting because at the same time, so you have David Cicilline this month is running to be the number 4 U.S. House Democrat as assistant Democratic leader. It might sound sort of arcane to people, but the top 3 Democrats we're expecting in the House, now that Democrats have retaken it, will be Nancy Pelosi as Speaker, Steny Hoyer as her number 2, and James Clyburn as whip. They're all in their 70s, and there's a lot of thinking in the Democratic caucus you need younger people to come along. Well, if he wins that number 4 job, he might be the Pelosi heir apparent. I'm not predicting that yet, but just saying you can see how he's at least angling to be in that conversation, which is quite a turnaround from a guy we thought might lose his seat just a couple of years ago.
David Cicilline's whole image, I think, in the state of Rhode Island has changed over the last 4 or 6 years. He's really, people looking at him now as a strong congressman in the state, doing the job for his district. So I think that's really helped him over the years. And I think that's why we don't see any strong opposition against him at this point.
Right. When we come back, we'll take a look at the national scene, the U.S. Senate race, which was predictable. Stay with us.
It was a big day yesterday, incredible day. And last night, the Republican Party defied history to expand our Senate majority while significantly beating expectations in the House for the midterm and midterm year. We did this in spite of a very dramatic fundraising disadvantage driven by Democrats' wealthy donors and special interests and very hostile media coverage, to put it mildly. The media coverage set a new record and a new standard.
He tried to turn this thing today to say, hey, I actually like this. I'm going to have a better time negotiating with the Democrats right now. You know what? If you couldn't get stuff done with both houses, who are you kidding? And he threatened that if they start investigating him, all bets are off and there'll be nothing going on. So what do you think?
Well, I think we're going to have to see early on if they try to work together. I don't think there's going to be Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan sitting down trying to work together. But, he's badmother Pelosi all the time. I'll be very surprised if they work together too much at all. Maybe infrastructure. But, we might be in a situation where nothing gets done for 2 years again.
Well, let's take a look at before we take a look at the local race, Eric, see if you can pop up the Senate breakdown and the House breakdown stuff for us here. This is the map on the Senate election. and make what you want of that if you have a big screen, and then the House election as well. Well, it's a headline. But what we have here is a really, really ultra bifurcated country right now. The red mass in the middle and the coast and urban blues are really at this point. And how does this ever
you see
meld?
it in Rhode Island. If you look, I don't think I did not have them call up the map, but if you look at a map of Rhode Island's election results from last night, all the red towns that voted for Alan Fung border each other in the interior part of the state, mostly along the Connecticut border, and everything west of that or on the coast voted blue for Gina Raimondo. I mean, you have 2 states, and I actually think that's part of why. I hear callers, for example, call into your show and other shows on PRO, Dan, and they'll say, I don't know a single person who likes Gina Raimondo. How can she possibly win the election? And I actually can believe that, because if you're in Kent County, where Alan Fung squeaked out a narrow victory, you probably do have very few neighbors potentially who are voting for Gina Raimondo. But if you're over in the East Bay or Aquidneck Island, where she's getting almost 60%, a lot of people are voting for her.
The big difference, though, is in those areas where Alan Fung won, there's not a lot of voters. So you're winning, but you're winning with small numbers.
Right. We have the White House Flanders result as well, and you know, I in a way I feel real bad for Bob Flanders. $1 million into this whole thing. I don't know how much of that's his own money, but he too did that default Republican 35%. Remember, I should say about Alan Fung, by the way, he got 37% with 10% dangling. So if he was one-on-one with Gina Raimondo, maybe he got to 40.
I think he would have been in the 40s with no Trillo and no third-party candidates. I think he gets into the 40s.
Low 40s.
Very low 40s. And so, well, for two efforts at it, you'd think you can get there from there. But Bob, a blue chip candidate, not a blue chip race. What a candidate he would have been for governor if he wanted to do the work.
I think it could have been. But for the Senate, we did 2 polls. Both polls was behind by like 19 points. His campaign just never moved, never caught on at all. The voters never warmed up to it. And again, that's the Trump effect. Trump is so negative that hurt Bob Flanders.
I also think it's exponentially harder in a blue state like Rhode Island for a Republican to run for Congress, whether U.S. House, U.S. Senate. You saw Charlie Baker last night won 60-something% of the vote for re-election in Massachusetts because he's characterized himself as an anti-Trump Republican.
You guys follow this. You know, the 3 of us are like preaching to the choir. But when Bob Flanders announced, it was a pretty announcement. But I scratched my head and said, "What's he doing this for?" You know, what's he bringing? He doesn't have the disposition to go out and battle. He kept his reputation intact the entire way, which I think was important to him. And that's not what you do in order to be able to fight all the trends and the momentum that was going on.
I mean, and you know, Sheldon Whitehouse. I remember back before the 2010 floods, you used to say that his numbers were weak, and you can see him being in trouble in the right year. But he's had time as an incumbent to strengthen, and he's not the same Sheldon Whitehouse he was then.
And he told me he thought everyone loved his Kavanaugh performance. So here, that sold.
It did.
5-second thought.
I think, you know, the governor is in a strong position for the next 4 years on how she governs the state of Rhode Island.
And 2022 is going to be a really interesting year in Rhode Island politics.
Let me show you my golf clubs. There's some. You need some downtime here, pal. Thanks for your expertise, fellas. Final word when we come back. All right, so as soon as the election is over, a lot of, you know what, hits the fan, including the mayors of Central Falls and Pawtucket, who called a press conference earlier today to demand that the governor and the state legislature pay attention to it. Having lost the Paw Sox and feeling like Hasbro could be going the other way. We'll tackle that and much more coming up in ensuing programs. In the meantime, make sure you tune in weekdays 3 to 6 on WPRO. Thanks for checking in. Good night.